Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
And that's me.
That's you, Gus. Come
That's
on.
me.
How long have we been doing this?
That, probably should do that too.
All right. Can we promote
good.
when we have a chance, Christine?
Yes.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, September 21st. Is this me?
That's not
That's
me.
me.
Not me. I'm not doing it.
All right, that should be. All right, for September 21st, 2021, the meeting is called to order. As always, this meeting is video recorded, and we would like to take a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country. Thank you. I'll note, at least at the moment, the town website is down. So if you were watching this via Medfield TV or YouTube and trying to access the Zoom, take a look at the town's various social media accounts. Christine, where else can they get the link?
They can get it from, it's on Twitter and on Facebook currently.
On Twitter and on Facebook, if you'd like to join the Zoom. Hopefully the website will be back up to get the link directly from the agenda. All right, our first meeting tonight is, our first appointment tonight is with Treasurer Collector Georgia Kalivas, 2 weeks in a row. Welcome back, Georgia. Request that we vote to approve and confirm the sale of the town's general obligation municipal purpose loan 2021 bonds, dated September 29th, 2021, and vote to execute all necessary documents.
He's promoting you right now.
So I am here to finalize the bonding process. Last Wednesday, the town of Medfield received bids from bond underwriters for $13,975,000 per bond with varying terms. The bond issue is to finance the construction of the water treatment plant, the purchase of a new fire engine, a new dump truck, a sidewalk tractor, and reconstruction of West Street. And it's also to pay off the maturing ban for the painting of the water tower that was done this past spring. Additionally, the issue included a refunding for outstanding bonds from 2007 and 2010. I'm pleased to announce that this refunding will save the town approximately $90,000 in interest. I know last week I told you it was about 60, but our interest rate was phenomenal, and we're looking at a $90,000 savings in interest in the future. The winning bidder was Piper Sandler and Company with the lowest average interest rate of 1.466%. The town received a bond premium of approximately $1.5 million, and we were able to restructure the loan with a lower par and reduce the amount that we needed to borrow. So I am here tonight for you to finalize the bonding process and request that you vote and sign all applicable bond documents. Bond proceeds will be deposited next Tuesday.
All right, so I think we have several votes we need to take to formalize the sale of the bonds.
Just one multi-paragraph vote that's been consolidated.
We have many paragraphs to read, but a single vote. I apologize. So I'll ask the clerk to read our prescribed form of vote.
Move that the sale of the $12,685,000 general obligation municipal purpose loan of 2021 bonds of the town of Medfield dated September 29th, 2021, to Piper Sandler and Company at the price of $14,164,763.22, and accrued interest, if any, is hereby approved and confirmed. The bond shall be payable on June 1st of the years of the table listed on the certification, vote beginning on June 2022 and maturing on June 2041. Furthermore, vote to approve the marketing and sale of the bonds, the preparation and distribution of the notice of sale and preliminary official statement dated September 2nd, 2021, and the final official statement dated September 15th, 2021, and that each form approved by the town treasurer be and hereby are ratified, confirmed, approved, and adopted. Furthermore, vote that the bond shall be subject to redemption at the option of the town as set forth in the official statement. Furthermore, vote to authorize the execution and delivery of a refunding escrow agreement dated September 29th, 2021, between the town and U.S. Bank, the refunding escrow agent, relating to the refunding portion of the bonds. Furthermore, vote that the town treasurer and the Board of Selectmen are authorized to execute and deliver a continuing disclosure undertaking in compliance with SEC Rule 15C2-12. Furthermore, authorize and direct the town treasurer to establish post-issuance federal tax compliance procedures with bond counsel and to monitor and maintain the tax-exempt status of the bonds and comply with the relevant securities laws. Furthermore, vote that each member of the Board of Selectmen, the town clerk, and the town treasurer are hereby authorized to take any and all such actions and executive and deliver such certificates, execute and deliver such certificates, receipts, or documents that are necessary to carry into effect the provisions of the foregoing votes. End of motion.
I'm sorry, Gus, my mind got distracted. Could you read that again, please?
Would you like it backwards?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any amendments to the motion? No? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. It passes. Thank you, Georgia. That's good news.
I would have been happy to read it again, Pete. I kind of enjoy it after a while, once you get on a roll.
So we're going to move to our next agenda item, welcoming Jen Golson from JM Golson LLC, and welcoming the Planning Board and members of the Affordable Housing Trust to discuss the draft FY 21-2025 Housing Production Plan. Nick, can we promote the Planning Board and Affordable Housing Trust members, please? Welcome, Ms. Golson.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Just give us a minute. We will get the Planning Board,
Sure.
everybody promoted. Can you promote Ann there as well? Ann Thompson? Thank you. All right, looks like everybody is here. Welcome to the Planning Board and to members of the Affordable Housing Trust. Do we need for them to formally open a meeting of the
They
Planning
should
Board?
open their meeting.
So if whoever's going to chair for the Planning Board for this portion of the meeting, if you could formally open your meeting and note the members of your board who are participating remotely, please.
Sure, this is Seth Meehan of Planning Board. Seeing that it's 7:12, I've got Paul McKechnie, Jim Brand, Teresa James, and Associate Member Blake McDermott.
Great, thank you, Seth. All right, Ms. Wilson, welcome.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm Jen Goldsam. I'm a planning consultant, and I was hired a few months ago to help the town of Medfield create an update to the housing production plan. And so we went through a process where we worked closely with the Affordable Housing Trust and the Planning Board and the town planner, did an updated housing needs assessment based on the newest American Community Survey that we had access to at that time, which was the 2019 five-year survey. And we'll be, just so you know, we'll be integrating a few of the 2020 numbers that we've recently gotten access to. The whole 2020 census isn't yet available, but we have some key numbers that we can put in. It doesn't change the key findings, but we wanted you to have an updated plan as much as possible. So if you go to the next slide, in the housing production plan, which I think you got about a week ago or so to review, and I know it's a lengthy document. Hopefully you've been able to review some of it or perhaps all of it. You all look like you're quick studies, so and I did get some comments from folks, so I appreciated that. But you'll know that there are essentially five key components of it. One is the updated housing needs assessment, development constraints analysis, an implementation capacity analysis, and then we have a chapter on 5-year housing goals and strategies to go along with those goals. And then there is an action plan as well, saying when would you do these things, who would be responsible for them, and it looks at some of the sequencing. I want you to know up front, yeah, that's fine. I want you to know up front that a housing production plan is a regulatory document, meaning that it's recognized by the state and it gives you the ability to enter into safe harbor, which you're currently in because you had a current housing production plan at the time that you produced units. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those numbers, but even though this is a state-recognized plan and it has some authority to provide you with a safe harbor, there is nothing in the statute or in the guidelines, I should say, or the regulations that mandate you implement the plan. So none of the recommendations are binding. I say that, it tears my heart out to say that as a planner because I think the recommendations are good and I hope that you take them into consideration. But I also want you to know that you can meet safe harbor, you can achieve 10%, you can meet your 1-year or 2-year goals for safe harbor without even following the recommendations of the plan. They're simply guidance. So with that being said, I think it's helpful to do a quick overview of some basics and definitions. I suspect the members of the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board know these definitions, but I also think for the benefit of folks watching on Facebook, I don't know where else we are, YouTube, it might be helpful to just get on the same page about some of these terms. We try hard not to use jargon, but with this kind of plan, it's inevitable that we'll slip into a little bit of jargon. If you hear me say something that I have not properly defined, please call me out on that because I don't mean to do that. So the next slide, we're going to just go through some 40B basics, and most people are familiar with the term 40B or the comprehensive permit law, but I'm not sure that most people know sort of its basis and where it came from and what some of the nuances are. And so what I like to tell people is that the law isn't really about housing at its heart. It's really about people. It's about fairness and it's about opportunity. And so you'll see throughout the plan that we did talk about what happens after you get to 10%. 10% is an arbitrary percentage. It doesn't actually address local housing needs or regional housing needs or statewide housing needs. And so as a planner, we would be remiss if we didn't point out that there's still a local need for housing, diversity of housing types, various levels of affordable housing, supportive housing. And so you'll see that in the plan, we did point those things out. So the other thing I want you to know is that 40B was enacted by the state in 1969, and it was really meant to help address a shortage of affordable homes in the state. But it also set up a fair share standard, this 10% standard that I just mentioned, that is trying to promote inclusion of diverse populations and communities across the state. And you'll note, if you look at the date, that it was all in response to civil rights movement. It came a year after the National Fair Housing Act, and so it was in accordance with the movement of the time. And it's been the primary tool in the state that has created the most affordable housing units across the state. So as I said before, next slide, the statute sets up a fair share goal. That goal is 10%. I'm going to talk a little bit about Medfield, where you are right now, and I'm also going to define what I mean by affordable housing. You can see on the slide I capitalized the A and I underlined it because a lot of people talk about housing that is affordable, housing that is attainable, housing that is below market rate perhaps because of its location or its size or its condition sometimes. But what I'm going to talk about in this plan are two types of affordable housing. One is affordable housing with a capital A, and I'll define it in a minute, but I'll give you a hint as to what it is, and you already know. It's housing that will count toward your 10% goal. But there's all sorts of other types of housing that can be, and when we do plans, we include as goals and as strategies in terms of how do you address local housing needs. Many times, I would say perhaps all of the time, you need housing beyond what's required in that SHI with the capital A and underlined affordable housing. I'm not going to talk much about the GLAM requirements, but there's something else in the statute called the General Land Area Minimum. Some people call it GLAM. And it says, so there's actually two goals, and you can comply with one or the other to meet the statute. One is the 10% of year-round housing that is affordable and counted on the subsidized housing inventory. And the second is 1.5% of your land area as affordable housing. The HPP, or Housing Production Plan, does not deal with the GLAM calculation. So if 40B goals, if that 10% or that 1.5% of land area is not met, what happens? And so what happens and what has happened in Medfield, although you've done a lot of local initiatives that the Board of Selectmen have been friendly towards, is that developers can seek something that's called a comprehensive permit. And the intent of a comprehensive permit is that local permits are streamlined into the ZBA approval. Developers will request waivers of certain local regulations, often it's local wetlands bylaws or zoning bylaws, in order to create housing that includes affordable units. Next slide. And what 40B does is it enables your zoning board of appeals, or people call it the ZBA, to approve developments under flexible rules, meaning they can waive those provisions of the zoning bylaw or other local bylaws if the project includes 20 to 25% of units as affordable. And I say a range because it depends on the subsidizing agency and the program you're going through and how many deeply affordable units there are. Most people think of it more as the 25% requirement, but there is a range. And what does that mean? When I say enables the ZBA to approve these things, it also limits the ZBA. So the ZBA could, in theory, deny or impose conditions, but if those denials are found, unreasonable, but the imposition of conditions is found uneconomic, then the Housing Appeals Committee of the state can overturn that, and that is often what happens. The other thing I want to point out is that, and I know that you know this, but it's really an important point. All rental units, for projects that are creating rental units, all of those units, including the market rate units, will count on the subsidized housing inventory. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about the SHI, or the subsidized housing inventory. But it's really important to make that distinction when you're trying to reach 10%, because if you approve rental units, rental developments, all of the units, even if there's 75% of those units that are market rate units, the entire project will be listed on the SHI. So it bumps you up faster towards that 10% goal. And then, of course, if it's ownership, like condos, for example, only the deed-restricted units will count on the SHI. So you'll make less progress toward that 10%. Doesn't mean ownership housing that's affordable is not needed in the community, but if your goal is to reach that 10%, many communities favor rental housing for that very reason. So what do we mean? I keep using this term subsidized housing. You can go to the next slide. Subsidized housing inventory, SHI. Some people call it the SHI. I didn't know what people were talking about when I first heard the SHI. What is the SHI? It's this, the subsidized housing inventory. And so to count toward the 40B goals, the units must be eligible for this list. The SHI is just a list. And they need to meet 4 requirements. They need to, 1, have a long-term affordability restriction, minimum of 30 years or 15 years for a rehab program. You need to have affirmatively and fairly marketed units. So that means throughout the region they need to be affirmatively and fairly marketed. Sometimes people say, well, we have low-priced units in the town. Why can't you convert those? And, if somebody who is low income is living in that unit, why can't we put a deed restriction and then count that on the subsidized housing inventory? That's because they were not fairly and affirmatively marketed throughout the region. So in order to do that, you need to have some turnover so that you can then go through a marketing process that allows people that, maybe don't even have a connection to Medfield to apply for the units. So that's number 2, marketing approach is really important. The third thing is it needs to be approved and funded with a subsidizing agency. And I say approved/funding because the statute, or the guidelines, I should say, actually lets you do a LIP, which you've been familiar with, a local initiative program, which actually doesn't need state subsidies in terms of dollars. What you get is you get technical assistance from DHCD, and that's counted from the Department of Housing and Community Development. and that's counted as your subsidy. But I want you to know, and I think you know this already, but for the folks watching, I want you to know that this is one of the 4 requirements, that it needs to be seen as something that's subsidized, or you can apply for something that is called local action unit, which means it's done through your zoning. And I'm happy to explain that more, but just to give you an overview. And then, of course, the price needs to be set to an affordable income, and the income limits are set at a maximum of 80% of the area median income, and I do have a slide on what that means. It's the next slide. So people ask, well, what does that mean? So it changes every year, and it also changes by household size, meaning how many people live in this housing unit. And so if you look at this little chart, diagram, I don't know what you want to call it, display, if you're a single person living alone and you make $70,750 a year or less, you could qualify for affordable housing under that 80% area median income threshold. These are set for the whole region, and so it's a very large region that even goes into New Hampshire. If you look at Medfield's median household income, I'm sure you know it's much higher than this. So the median income in Medfield as of the 2019 American Community Survey was almost $161,000. If you look at that whole area, the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy metropolitan area, the median income is $120,800. And then if you look at that 80% of the area median income, depending on the household sizes, these are the income thresholds. So a household of 4 would make a maximum of $101,050 to be considered potentially eligible for affordable housing. Now, I say potentially because these programs also look at your assets. It's not just about your income, but I have your income limits here. And then, of course, it goes up as the household size goes up. So I just want to pause and see if, I went over this quickly. I don't want to take a lot of your time on this, but do you have any questions so far?
Planning board, anyone out there in planning board Zoom land with a question? Looks like no one's rushing to unmute.
Okay, and I'm happy to take questions more. I just don't like to. I don't like to talk for too long without asking. All right, good. So the next slide is showing what we mean by these different terms. There's 2 terms I'm going to walk you through: approval and certification. People get these mixed up all the time. So, in order to have the ability to enter safe harbor, as you have done already, you first need to have an approved plan. The plan expires after 5 years, which is why you're doing a new one. In order to approve the plan, in order to have that approved plan, you need to have the planning board and the board of selectmen first locally approve, and that's what we're hoping you'll consider tonight. You may need another meeting. That's often the case. And then once you have a local approval, you have to submit, proof that you've approved the plan, selectmen and the planning board. Then you can submit the plan to the state and ask them if it meets all of their requirements. And if it does, then the state will approve the plan. So that's the first condition. Then if the town permits, and these are just straight from this is basically straight math, and I'm going to get into some of the nuances in a minute, but the straight math is based right now on the 2010 census, which, as you know, is quickly becoming out of date. The state will release new numbers for you soon. I've done some guesswork, but I have to say that the 2020 census has just come out, and the state, as far as I'm aware, has not released the new guidelines yet, or the new goals yet. They will soon, but I just want you to know that I'm not giving you an official number based on the 2020 census. It's not my role as a planning consultant, so I don't want to get in trouble by the state or anyone else.
We won't hold you to it.
Okay, good. So don't hold me to this. But as of the 2010 census, you would need to create 21 units that count on the subsidized housing inventory in order to get that 1-year safe harbor. So that would mean your plan could then be certified. Under the new census, if you look at, we have to figure out, the reason this isn't straightforward is because you need to know the year-round housing units. And we've done some math to look at vacant or seasonally vacant units and occupied units. And we've done a little bit of guesswork here. So we think that your new requirement would be 22 units to get 1 year. So it's not changing that much. It's only changing a little bit. But again, don't hold us to that. The state will come out with their official numbers. But if you are able to produce that, and this is assuming for a community that's not about to reach 10%, and you obviously are. So I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute on the next slide. But just so you understand how Safe Harbor is done under this certification of a housing production plan, it looks at producing 0.5% of the year-round housing, and that's where that 21 units comes from under the 2010 census.
I do have a question on that.
Yeah.
I think the number, if I recall, I think it was the 2020 number, is projected that we would need 29 more units.
Yeah, can you go to the next
I
slide?
think that was the projection. The thing that caught me on that was wherever I read it in the plan, there was one place that talked about, 22, 21, 23, whatever the
Right.
new number is for 1 year of Safe Harbor, but then it was like 42
Yes.
for the second year, which basically says you meet your 10% goal, but you are not protected even though you do unless
No,
you
no,
get
no.
the 2-year Safe Harbor?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you pointed that out. And we'll just clarify that in the plan. That was a little bit of laziness on our part. We should have said that since at that point you will have reached 10%, you don't need to worry about getting certified anymore. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is where you stand now with your subsidized housing inventory. For 2010 census numbers, you're at 9.6%. Our best unofficial estimate of where you'll be with the 2020 numbers is 9.34. So you'll have gone down a little bit. You have 1,726 units listed. Under those 2010 numbers, you would need 16 more to reach that 10%. And if our guesswork is correct, you would need 29 more units to reach 2020 census numbers. Is this making sense? I know I'm going over a lot of numbers.
Tell me what the listed units listed is for.
Yeah,
first
that's
year?
what's included on your subsidized housing inventory. So that's,
That's not the right number then.
oh, it's not the right number. I'm sorry.
The right
That's my
number is
mistake.
about
I'll correct
410.
that. I'll correct that before. I'll give an updated PowerPoint to the town and correct that number. My
Around
apologies.
410 or so. is
Okay,
what's
my
the-
apologies.
That's all right.
So if you go to the next slide, what I'd like to do now is just give you a very brief snapshot of local need. You know that we collected a lot of demographics information and did a whole analysis for you, but I just pulled out some, at the risk of jumping to the conclusions too fast in this presentation, I didn't want to spend a lot of time going through this. So this really is a snapshot. But the point of this snapshot is to demonstrate that you still have housing needs for more diverse housing stock that goes beyond reaching that 10% under the subsidized housing inventory. Next slide. So you have, we just pulled this map for you. If you think it's a helpful map, we're happy to put it in the plan. I pulled it the other day when I was putting together the this presentation because now we do have the benefit of the 2020 census numbers. And so what this shows you is that if you look at your population growth between 2010 and 2020, you'll see that your growth is right in line. Could you just point to, can you find Medway there? Yeah, or sorry, Medfield, yeah.
It's easy to find Hopkinton on this map.
Yeah,
by the way.
Hopkinton is the bright orange one.
It stands out.
It does. But you'll see that with the communities surrounding you, Sherborne, Dover, can't think of all the communities off the top of my head. With those communities, they're all right in line with the same generally the same range of population growth. A few communities to your south has seen less population growth, and then the darker you get, the more population growth. So that bright orange one off to the left is Hopkinton. We also see, as you know, because you've studied this, that population projections indicate that you will have growth in the senior population, older adults age 65 and over. And I know the town's done quite a bit of work on looking at senior needs and population change as well. You have little racial diversity, all the towns around you do. So that's not a surprise. Your housing costs are extremely high. I know I'm not telling you anything new. And then your rental opportunities are relatively scarce. Next slide. And so these are just some of the key indicators that we typically look at when we're trying to figure out what a community needs for housing stock. The other thing we look at is what size housing do you have? And so based on the census, and you should know this is an estimate, these are based on sample sizes, so this is not a 100% count, but based on the estimates your housing stock is mostly larger units of 4+ bedroom, mostly single family. Yet, just under half of your households, 47%, are estimated to only have 1 or 2 people living in them.
This
And-
was one of the most startling figures in your report that
Yeah,
resonated for me.
and
I was
to some-
surprised by that.
Yeah, thank you for observing that. It's always striking when we find this mismatch, and some people come back at us and say, "Well, maybe these 47% of people want to live in these bigger homes," and that could be true. But what you need to think about is that larger homes tend to be more expensive to buy or rent. They tend to be more expensive to heat or cool, more expensive taxes, and more to maintain. So if someone who is aging in the community, is living alone in a 4-bedroom home and needing to, plow the sidewalk, mow the lawn, paint, pay for heat, taxes, etc., you can see why seniors often say that they have trouble staying in a community. Now, that's not all of those 1 or 2 person households, but a lot of them happen to be seniors. And as the community ages, you'll see that most likely grow. That's the best guess that we can make at this point, just given trends. So after 10%, we would like you to consider that there's still a need for greater housing diversity. Could you go to the next slide? Sorry. So what our analysis indicates is that you need more moderately priced units to help members who have been in the community perhaps for a long time afford to stay in the community, as well as newcomers. People have talked about equity and diversity and welcoming new families, including having units that are affordable for people just starting out. Affordable units is still a need, as well as more rental units, especially affordable rental units. And also service-enriched housing, and these are nothing new. These are all things that were pointed out in your last plan. We don't have findings that are different from your last plan. It's really a continuation. But service-enriched housing, especially with an aging population, is very important, as well as for people of all ages. And I know that there's been a priority among the trust and perhaps others in the community to try to find properties for group homes or service-enriched housing. So that's the kind of housing that I'm talking about here. Next slide. So that's the really brief snapshot. I'm happy to go into more details, and I do have the plan up on my screen if you want to go through any of those details, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, and so I just want to dive right into the goals and strategies. Next slide. And so there are 5 goals listed in the plan. They're very similar to what was in the last plan. We did a little wordsmithing and we maybe recategorized them a little bit, but for the most part, they're very similar. One is to meet those housing production goals. You're almost there, and I think that you have some good initiatives in place already with the trust being capitalized and other ideas out there to reach that 10%. The second one is addressing your local needs, not just getting to the 10%, but those local needs that I was just talking about. The third is to distribute housing options in strategic locations throughout the town, and we'll talk about that a little more when we get into some of the strategies. The fourth is to support older residents to help them afford to remain in the community. And then the fifth is to make sure you have the capacity within the community or by collaboration regionally to actually implement your ideas for gaining that 10% and for meeting those local needs. And so we have a few different ideas about that. Next slide. So our approach in strategies is to put them into 3 buckets. One has to do with planning policies and zoning. The second has to do with local initiatives and programmatic strategies, things that you can do with local funds, local property, local resources like staff time, volunteer time. And then the third is to look at your capacity for implementing the plan, education in the community around housing needs, as well as coordination so that you can really leverage the assets that you already have. And what I want to say before you go on to the next slide is 2 things. One, this is really not a blueprint, like I said. We're not expecting that the plans that we create will be followed to the T and that every single thing will be adopted. Some things you'll notice that we used words like consider or study, And so we were very careful, and the Planning Board and Affordable Housing Trust wanted us to be even more careful with those terms and really pushed us into more language like that, which was consider this, consider that, study this, study that. So there's really not a lot of definitive strategies in here saying thou shalt do this. So your approval does not indicate that you will be able to adopt every single strategy in here, nor is that an expectation when we write it. So I view it more as a menu of choices. So the second thing I just want to say before you go to the next slide is that we craft these strategies because we pay very careful attention to the state's guidelines for creating these housing production plans. So they really require a number of things to be in the plan. One is they want us to specify zoning amendments that will promote more housing diversity, including affordable housing. And so that's why you'll see that there are a number of recommendations that ask you to consider zoning changes or even reconsider things that have already been brought to town meeting. The second thing is that the town, or the state rather, wants to see in these plans that you are committing to use surplus town property if you have it. That's appropriate for putting out as an RFP, request for proposals, to find developers who will create mixed income or affordable housing units. And that you are willing to support other comprehensive permit. I know that you've supported a number of local initiative projects under the LIP program. And so stating that you are going to continue to do that in strategic locations. It could be LIPs for variety of private sites. It could be for private nonprofit developers. It could be for profit. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you say that you're willing to support those in certain locations or under certain circumstances. And then the fourth thing, I guess, there's three categories, but there are actually four things I want to talk about in terms of the state requirements, is that you need to show that you are collaborating regionally. And so we always look for ways to enhance regional collaboration, not just because we think it's a good idea and it helps to leverage your local capacity, but it also is required by the state to state that you will try to collaborate regionally in some formal ways. Next. Okay, so under each of these buckets, we have a number of strategies. I'm not going to go into them in depth, but I'm happy to go back and answer any questions that you have. We have a number of recommendations to strengthen or consider some adaptations to existing provisions, including your inclusionary zoning bylaw, which we believe could be strengthened by providing more flexibility, maybe options, instead of creating units on site, perhaps payment in lieu options that could also help fund the housing trust. Reek, I know you considered adoption of a senior housing zoning bylaw that did not succeed at town meeting. We think that it could be something that you want to reconsider, maybe making adjustments, maybe looking carefully at what some of the objections were. Because we do think there is a need for senior housing in the community. We think that looking at the accessory dwelling unit provisions and creating some more flexibility around under certain circumstances, can those be a little bit easier to obtain? And more flexible zoning tools that can really be alternatives to 40B developments. Some communities say, we don't mind doing LIPs and we don't mind doing 40Bs, and that's fine. But this is one idea that came out of the first working session that we did with the Planning Board and Affordable Housing Trust, and we've provided in all of these just some examples of either other bylaws or other guidance documents that you can link to find out more information. The next is something that I know that the town is already thinking of doing some of these things, and I've already applied for funding to help study these things. One is to have more flexibility around creating cluster housing, or it's called the open space residential, what is the P? Now I can't remember. Oh, well, I don't know. Some people call it D, open space residential development, and I can't remember why yours calls it open space residential P. It's probably plan, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But the idea here is to make that a more attractive option than doing a straight subdivision. Now, you may not have a lot of property left that this is applicable to, but to look at whether that makes sense or not. And then the last is looking at the Route 109 corridor. And we have a map on the next slide that just shows you some ideas. And you've talked about this before in other contexts. And I know that these are not necessarily brand new ideas, but looking at your downtown area, can you reactivate some of the upper stories that are already in existence that are underutilized? Can you look at creating a historic preservation method by allowing some larger historic homes to add additional units within the footprint of the existing home? In that case, that would be area B in the yellow there. That would be, we would recommend working very closely with your historic commission, creating guidelines that are very appropriate to protect those resources. My first degree was in historic preservation, so I feel very strongly about that aspect of not just, permitting conversions without really looking at how does that affect the character and the historic nature of those buildings. But that's another idea that other towns have successfully adopted. And then area A is, could you encourage some redevelopment, maybe even in a way that allows the existing businesses in area A to remain, and some redevelopment to allow mixed use, including residential, on those properties. So again, just ideas, nothing binding here. Under local initiative strategies on the next slide, we have added things that you're already working on, seeking proposals and to fund incentivizing rentals program. That may go by another name eventually, but that's what it was going by when we wrote this. And essentially what that idea is to create small-scale new development or reuse existing rental units to create affordable deed-restricted units. And to use the trust funds that are already extant to help foster that. Happy to talk more about that. The next idea is to continue to work to foster creation of special needs congregate housing. A lot of people call that group homes. We had some ideas and some resources that we also passed on, so hopefully that will be helpful. I know you've been thinking about this for quite some time. Continuing to support the Housing Authority's project, or proposal, I should say, to create development on the surplus property adjacent to the current Tilden Village. And then looking at, are there town properties to redevelop? I'll have a slide on that next. Considering potentially short-term rental assistance. A lot of communities are just doing that temporarily. Some people said, well, where does the funding come from, since we don't have the Community Preservation Act? And you could fund that privately, potentially. The trust funds, if they were not, some communities have done that with philanthropic kind of organizations to fund that privately. Others have used CPA funds, and then others have used trust funds that are unrestricted. And I understand that the bond you currently have access to does have restrictions, so I don't believe that would be an appropriate use of the bond, but perhaps there'd be other trust funds. And hopefully COVID doesn't last this long, but if you do adopt inclusionary zoning in lieu payments, you could get unrestricted funds that way for the trust. The next one, number 12, continue to support senior housing development at the Hinckley property. And then the last is potentially down the road, look at a home buyer assistance program. And some people said, well, where does the funding come for that? A likely source, again, is Community Preservation Act, but perhaps there would be other trust funds that you could have access to, again, like the inclusionary zoning payments, that you could fund that kind of program. It is an expensive program to both administer and fund. It's an expensive way to create housing units, but after you reach 10%, it may be a way to preserve some of the modest housing stock by purchasing smaller homes. A number of communities do this successfully, including Norfolk, although their housing costs are not as high as yours. So something to consider. This slide, the next one, is just showing you the Tilden Village property next to the existing Housing Authority property. And then 2 properties that we mentioned in the plan, which you can push back if you think these are not appropriate or if you have other plans for these properties, but looking at the Dale Street School and is it called the FAF Center? Is that how you? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, and the last one, I'm trying to move through quickly here. I know I've taken a lot of your time. increasing capacity education coordination. I won't bother to read all of these. I'm happy to go back and talk about them. But one of the things you'll see is that we have a recommendation to do more regional collaboration and also support services by working with other communities in the region. Your Metropolitan Area Planning Council is working with the town to implement this kind of a program that's, using examples from other parts of the state, include the Regional Housing Services Office, which serves the Sudbury-Concord area, where they basically can increase your staff capacity to staff the trust, give support services to the housing trust, as well as other initiatives, look at local LIP applications or other projects, even could potentially help out, the Hinckley South property or even the Housing Authority property. So it just provides you with extra staff capacity. They also can monitor units to make sure that they're not lost on the subsidized housing inventory. Sometimes there are units that have deed restrictions that expire. So the regional housing services can provide help with monitoring. So that's typically why communities buy into those. They can also do things like this, update your housing production plan. And we've worked with the Regional Housing Services Office to do work like this, where we focus on engagement and strategies and goals, and they do the housing needs assessment update. So that's another way that you can use those types of services. And then we have some ideas for advancing advocacy as well through CHAPA's Municipal Engagement Program, which are taking applications now. I don't know where Sarah went, but hopefully she's listening or on Zoom. But I think she's aware that CHAPA just announced that they're taking applications. I think they sent it out either today or yesterday. It was pretty recently.
Hey Jen, I'm in my office. I'm
there
watching
you
on
are.
Zoom.
I've been
But I
looking
didn't,
around for you. Okay.
The Affordable Housing Trust talked about it. They wanted to talk more about it at their October 7th meeting. So Dana Lewinter is going to be joining them to brief them on that program.
That's fantastic. Great. Okay, so the next slide is just the next steps. And so at some point, I know that you may not be ready to vote right this moment, but at some point down the road, the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board would need to vote. It doesn't necessarily need to be unanimous. It often is, but it just needs to be a simple majority vote to approve the housing production plan. Then the town can submit it to the state, and we have sample language. It's nothing, miraculous. It's just saying that the two entities approved, and this is the vote, and we, offer it to the state for their approval.
I think we're going to schedule the vote in October sometime.
Oh, great. Okay, good. And so the process, I typically, if it's okay with you, I typically submit the plan in draft form to Phil DiMartino at the Department of Housing and Community Development, just saying this is before the Board of Selectmen and before the Planning Board. They have not voted on it yet, but please tell me if you think anything's missing. And he often writes back within a couple weeks, and I'm happy to add anything if he thinks something's missing. But what that does is, by the time you do vote in October maybe, and we submit the plan officially, then they've already really reviewed it unofficially, and I know it's going to be complete. So just to give you the timeline, they have technically 30 days to just tell you if it's complete or not. So we save that time when we submit it early. And then they have 90 days from receiving a complete plan to give you an approval. And the approval is actually retroactive to the day you submit a complete plan. So if we submit a complete plan in October, whenever you approve it, we could submit it, within a day or so of you approving it. And the planning board approval, we would submit it. We would think that they'd probably say it's complete the day we submitted it due to the informal pre-approval that we do. And then your letter would be dated retroactively to the day that you submit a complete plan. So not that you're too worried about the timeline, but just so you know.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll start with the planning board to see if anyone on the planning board has any comments for discussion. I think I would suggest that we limit this portion of the comment to larger conceptual points. To the extent anyone has wordsmithing comments or particular comments, we can provide that directly to Jen for the next round, so we don't have to go line by line through the 100 pages or so that we have here. And so I'll start with the planning board. Does anyone on the planning board have any question or comment for Jen or item for discussion?
This is Seth. I've got one question actually regarding inclusionary zoning and the need for flexibility. I know that we haven't received any proposals, Jen, but have we gotten feedback from other people that our numbers just aren't right? I don't want to blame anything on COVID here, but this hasn't been a typical 4-year period. So.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. No, I don't believe we've gotten feedback. Sarah, you can correct me if you've heard something that I haven't, but typically when we look at inclusionary zoning bylaws and we see that they provide really no flexibility and they're not being used, we often recommend that you look at other options, including ways to comply that don't necessitate creating units. I know that the Housing Trust doesn't have a regular funding stream, so that's often one way. Not that it would be regular, because you'd be reliant on somebody triggering the inclusionary zoning, but that is one way to create a funding stream for the Housing Trust. Also allowing development on other properties. You know, I know that there's an idea floated to try to reuse existing rental apartments to convert them to affordable units. That's the kind of thing that a developer could potentially help you do if they weren't required to create units on the site of their development. So it just provides more flexibility.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
Jim, I see you have unmuted. Hello, Jim Brand.
Thank you. Thank you. Jen, I had a question about the Community Preservation Act. What have you seen other towns doing, and what would you see as the advantages of Medfield or disadvantages of Medfield going that route?
Sure, yeah, thanks for asking that. So it certainly is an additional tax on people, so that's a disadvantage, and I know that you've talked about that in the past, you know, that's something that may not be a popular concept. The advantage is that it can provide a regular funding stream for affordable housing as well as open space, historic preservation, and recreation. And some communities have been very deliberate about saying that we want more of the money for a certain purpose because we think the purpose has more critical need. So some communities, I'm working with a community on the Cape right now that has stated that most of the money should go to open space because they have a very delicate water supply system and need to preserve open space because of that. Other communities, bigger communities than yours, Cambridge, Somerville, say a higher percentage should go to affordable housing. But my point really isn't that that you should follow any one of these communities. It's more that you can be deliberate about if you think that most of the funds, if housing is the biggest need and you think most of the funds should go to housing, you can say that up to 80% of the CPA funds should go to housing. So it can be a very strong source of funding for housing that would create a regular source of funding for the Housing Trust, which I know is been a discussion in the community, and you have been, funding the Housing Trust in creative ways, which has been helpful for the community. But the CPA could provide a regular funding stream, and so that's the main benefit. The second benefit, or maybe you can disagree with me on which is the main benefit and which is secondary, but the other benefit is that you do get state trust funds. So anybody who has a real estate transaction in Medfield is already paying into this fund because there's a surcharge on any deed you file. Anything you file at the Registry of Deeds has an extra surcharge that goes into the State Community Preservation Fund. And that fund is only distributed to communities that actually have adopted CPA at the local level. So I just saw an email actually this morning that said, or this afternoon, I don't remember when I saw it, today sometime, that said that it looks like there's going to be a 35% match as the base match on any CPA dollars that have been collected locally. The state is going to provide 35% match through the state trust fund. So that can be a significant amount of money that the town wouldn't otherwise receive.
Any other planning board questions, comments? Everybody remains muted, so Pete, I'll turn to you next.
I've got a sort of a general policy sort of area that I wanted to talk to you about, and then I've got 4 specific questions if the chairman will let me ask those.
You can ask the first 3, and if they're good, you can ask the 4th.
Why is our population going to go down by 2030?
It might not. I mean, those projections are a little bit old now, and now that
Whose projections are they?
Metropolitan Area Planning
MAPC?
Council. And now that we have the benefit of the 2020 census numbers, and your population did increase a little bit, I suspect that when they redo the population estimates, you'll see a change in that.
So Wilkins,
I'd be surprised. I'll take, as with all these things, I'll take the under if you want to take the over on
I was surprised by that prediction. I don't think that's going to happen either. Wilkins Glen is not permanently affordable, so we should be planning with the beacon companies for when that turns over and however many years it is.
Yeah, and I don't remember when it is expiring. We
I don't
probably
either, but
said
it's,
in the
10 or
plan
20 years from now, but
Yeah, 2042.
2042. Yeah, so you have time.
it's a lot of units, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you have some time to deal with that, but I think that, you know, it probably can't hurt to connect with
Okay.
CDEC, which is the state agency that helps communities with expiring use properties. It can't hurt to talk with the property owner about their plans, and if they're looking to refinance, you can use local funds to help with that, as there's also other funding sources that the state can help match.
See if we can try to encourage them to keep it as SHI units. How about the downtown? I see that we should be doing the stores under the apartments over zoning. Is there anything
Well,
else?
that's one consideration.
I've always thought that we should try to enlarge the area that's zoned for business, and I could see areas on the map that I would ask the town to consider adding to the downtown retail, basically.
Yeah, we
Is there
didn't
anything
really
else?
look at the commercial aspects of the zoning as much as trying to encourage some more housing to be integrated. In particular, there is maybe a few, I don't want to overstate it. I know of one off the top of my head, the Oddfellows building, that has some upper story
Third
space.
floor is just really dramatic. It's like 2-3 stories tall. It's huge.
Wow. It's an old dance hall, I think. Was
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Yeah, so just looking at opportunities like that, and is there any way that your zoning can encourage reuse of those properties is what we were mostly focused on.
Yeah, okay. Tilden Village. As I think about it, I think the ideal solution would be to tear down Tilden Village and build a whole new Tilden Village, because the existing one has electric heat, which I don't think is a good solution, and a lot of people have trouble getting to the second floors because there's no elevators. And I think a more modern Tilden Village might be a lot better, but that's a very difficult thing to do, I think. Do you have any, I mean, we're proposing, the Housing Authority is proposing an addition, but I'm not sure if they're going to come back with that or not at this point, but.
I agree, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. Other communities are rebuilding their existing housing.
Yeah.
It's, you
I
know,
think, but in terms of building the new one and maybe moving all those people into the new one and then tearing down.
could do something like that.
Okay.
We'd be happy to talk. I don't know, Sarah, if you I don't know how much time you want us to spend on this, but we'd be happy to talk with the Housing Authority. I don't know if they're already thinking along those lines. That's not what we heard initially.
I've never heard that. They're
Okay.
thinking of an addition.
Right,
Um,
right.
So, and then I had my policy sort of big issue that I wanted to go into with you. But before I do that, I wanted to just say, I thought your report was excellent. Your presentation here was really chock-a-block full of facts, and you did a great job. So I'm glad you're our consultant.
Thank you.
So I keep trying to think about things as a select board member, policy things, how to reduce our taxes, how to meet the needs of the town. And it strikes me that ADUs are ways of doing both of those things. I've decided that not many people want to form businesses in Medfield and have retail establishments in Medfield, so that the way that we can increase our tax base and reduce our taxes for existing homeowners is by building more housing that doesn't require a lot of municipal services. We have a development down on Route 27 called Old Village Square, where the houses it's fairly brand, it's maybe 6-7 years old. 42 units, 12 feet apart, selling for $800,000, $900,000 apiece. One school child in 42 units, so that the town is making a lot of money off of that development. So that depending on the type of housing you build, the town can make a lot of money, is I guess my thinking. Accessory dwelling units, I think, satisfy that need. If you permitted accessory dwelling units in 40,000 square foot lots in town, That would be like giving every 40,000 square foot lot owner a building lot that they could sell, and that's increases huge amounts of wealth in town. That would be like $300,000 or $400,000 into every homeowner's pocket. And if they build a 1,000 or 1,200 square foot home, that home satisfies our perceived need of having housing for seniors, for millennials. There would be one or two person housings that we would just be putting in each backyard, and each homeowner could decide whether to do it or not. So
I like your
It's on the
thinking,
list, right?
although I'm not sure what the question is. I'd be happy to concur.
there are several, you
In some
say
ways.
that there's some towns around Boston that have done it, but I don't know much about other people doing it. I know that they do it a lot in California, but I haven't heard much
Yeah,
about
so
here.
I mean, a couple things I can say about ADU. I did provide, or accessory dwelling units, I did provide some resources. I think I provided one that Amy Dane has written about ADUs, and it gives a survey of communities and their zoning and who's permitting it and who's not. So that might be interesting.
In Massachusetts?
Yeah, in Massachusetts. Yeah, that might be a good resource for you. Metropolitan Area Planning Council has also done some work. What are they calling it again, Sarah?
Living Little.
Living Little, yeah. The Living Little report, which I think I also provided a link. So that may be interesting for you to look at. And I agree, it can be a good strategy to help seniors age in the community, even by either getting additional funding, additional revenue for their own needs to help pay taxes or what have you, or can also be an opportunity to have caregivers live in the home. But it can also be an opportunity for seniors to actually move into those ADU units and then rent their single-family home when they no longer need that level of space, but they can still stay on their property. They can create, potentially, if the house is set up, certain way, you can create an accessible unit as well.
Can you do the ADUs so that they're sale units, so that you could just, the senior in the
Oh, I see
four-bedroom
what you're
house
saying.
basically builds the ADU in the backyard, moves into the ADU and sells
I
the
haven't
four-bedroom
seen it
house?
work that way. I've only seen rental housing created with ADUs. I guess in theory, you could do that. I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't be able to advise on the legal ramifications of that and how that affects, anything other than, zoning is silent on, in most communities. There's some communities have broken this, what I thought was an unbreakable law, but zoning is typically silent on ownership. So it would really just talk about the unit size, the location, how it looks from the outside, what parking requirements, things like that, whether you can do it in a carriage house, but it doesn't typically talk about, is it rental or ownership?
Yeah, I would assume it could be ownership then. But we have an attorney here, so he can tell us.
You're looking at me? I mean, you're essentially, you have a ADU proposal in here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say whether it's ownership or rental. Most of the
But
time,
you're
they're
going
rental.
beyond- I think it sounds like, Pete, you're going beyond what's suggested in the plan, almost to allowing just smaller lot sizes that you could subdivide and sell. That's what it sounds like to me. I mean, I always think of the ADU as attached, the in-law apartment, sort of, kind of part of one that you couldn't sell separately. I think what you're suggesting is, because a lot of them would be landlocked, right? So you'd have one behind the house. You're really thinking just allowing a 40,000 square foot lot to be subdivided into a 10,000 square foot lot and a 30,000 square foot lot if one of the houses is smaller?
I actually understood it differently. I understood it more of a condo situation where, like, if you had a carriage house and you created a unit, you would still be the property owner of the whole unit, but you'd create this condo situation for the carriage house. And I don't know legally how it would work, but yeah.
But usually the ADUs go with, they travel with the
Yeah, usually they do.
unit.
Yeah.
Right, they're part of it's one package.
But I don't think they have to, so.
But you do need more rental housing too. So I would, advise that you kind of stick to the traditional ADU scenario, which is probably less complicated. And I don't think you could mandate that kind of ownership arrangement anyway.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your coming and your work.
I mean, I think you'd end up with a lot of people just trying to put two houses on the lot. I think if you did that, right? Because that would be the highest, the most value you'd get out of it is to turn that into two 20,000.
Well, it would create a huge amount of value for homeowners in town.
Just like condoizing two-family tenements did. They basically just subdivide it and sell them off.
All right.
Seen
Is that
that
all your
20
comments, Pete?
That's it. Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
So, Gus?
I'm going to hand these to you, but I'm not going to go through these. So I brought 2 hard copies for the 2 of you, and I'm not going to go through. Just so you know what I did, this is available. Sarah's got it, Christine's got it. Planning Board, you're more than welcome to it. I went through the draft plan. I wound up printing out 24 pages, 2 or 3 of them or more just reference pages that I just wanted there so I could
Sure.
go back and forth. And I have 20 pages of edited comments.
Sure.
That's not as scary as it sounds. I use red, yellow, and green highlighter. Anything that's green, it sounded like a good idea to me. Anything that's red, it sounded like a bad idea to me. And then all the yellow stuff was stuff that I just said, I don't really understand it well enough to have an opinion one way or the other. So
What's
that's
the purple?
There's no, that's red. That's the way
Oh.
that was my copier.
That's
did that.
red,
No, the
okay.
yeah, that's, yours are faded.
All right.
And you can get the electronic version, which I think actually reproduced better. I'm not going to go through all the details, although I might briefly talk about inclusionary zoning in a minute. The only thing I want to talk about is when I read the plan, and actually when I listened to you, I found myself saying, I don't know what the town's goal is here in terms of where it's trying to get to. What I'm reading about is a plan that has lots of things we can do. Now that the state coerced us into getting 10% affordable housing, and we did damage to people in this town, we did damage to property in this town to do that, it rings a little hollow for me to kind of enthusiastically talk about how we're going to move ahead and just make things better for everybody. Because that's not what got us to the 10%. So I'll put that out there. I'm a little bit, braced for where this goes. For that reason, that's not because I don't agree with the idea that we should have a more diverse community, that it would be good if we were diverse in a lot of dimensions, including economic diversification. But the concern here, recognizing this is a community that's got 95% of its revenue coming from taxes on homeowners, and it's a community that cares very deeply about top-tier education. We, in a sense, are chasing our tail right now. We're kind of, on one hand, we're having this conversation about affordable housing, and we're almost at the 10% mark. And then we actually have some big projects like the state hospital that could potentially deliver us multi-hundreds of units of SHI qualified because they're rentals. So the lower of the 2 proposals we have right now is for 334 units, of which 25% will be affordable, but 335 will show up. The other proposal, most of them are sales, but their high number is 700. So even divide that in half and you still get 175 units. So I'm cautious about what we have here. At the same time we're doing that, we're having discussions about the schools and the cost of schools, and we're talking about the town's commitment to education and homeowners' interest in making sure we have great schools in order to enhance the real estate value of their property. So we've got 2 races going on here in this town. One between what can we do to get our property to be more valuable, and then what can we do to make it easier for people to get access to living here in town so they can go to our schools and get their kids to our schools and not have to pay the kind of costs that we're actually providing. I'm laying that picture out because the strategic framework I have, it's not just what do we do to get more affordable housing. The strategic framework I'm working off of is how do you balance this pressure of an ever more affluent town with, I think, incidentally, I love the demographic profile I really like that. The 40% of the town is through the roof. Who cares if our taxes go up $1,000, a couple $1,000s? It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And then the other 40% that's at the very lowest part, many of them are leaving, even as we compassionately say, how can we subsidize getting other people who are in their same position to come in, because we want to have a diverse housing housing inventory. I'm just sharing that with you, not to argue, not to criticize, but in terms of what the lay of the land here is in this town, we have a dynamic, and right now, as I see it, we're chasing our tail. And so, I'm not saying so we should do one or the other, I'm saying so we need coherence that takes that full thing into account. So that's broad statement about this. I have a lot of nitty-gritty things, but you can see the yellow and the green and red, and I'll be happy to, if you want to talk further, or anybody wants to, I'm happy to. The one, just as an illustration of the kind of things I was thinking about, given that Seth brought up the inclusionary zoning, I'm thinking that we should soften our inclusionary zoning rather than strengthen our inclusionary zoning. And you may mean something different when you use the word strengthen than I do. I'm looking at the 25%. I'm trying to shut my dinging phone off. It won't go. I can't find it. The other 25%, if we have a proposal for 334 units, and 25% of them are affordable and they're rentals, so we actually pick up 334, versus, and that is a number that's a lot of units to add to a town like ours of, almost 13,000, as opposed to setting up economics maybe at 15% that allow a developer not to have to build so many units in order to make up for the subsidized units. So where my head is going now, when we were talking 50 units, I get the 25%. When we start talking hundreds of units, it's like that generates a huge number of affordable units. Is that really where the town needs to go? Or should we actually look at inclusionary zoning that is easier on developers? At that, we're not going to see a lot of those projects, but in this case, we probably are going to see one. And in my view, I'm actually saying we should soften that requirement up because we're going to way overshoot. We'll be good for till 2050 on our 10-year census without doing anything. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I didn't want to get into the details of this, but from a strategic perspective on how to think about this, I think that's something that's unique about this town and what we're facing. Because the economics around education are huge.
I think making changes to the inclusionary zoning will take quite a bit of study to figure out how to, if you want to start to adjust those percentages. I think when I use the term strengthen, I think we're thinking of it in different ways. I think you're right. I mean strengthen it so it's used and creates either revenue for the trust or other benefits with units off-site. But I think when you think of strengthen, maybe, and I won't put words in your mouth, you think of making it more stringent, and that's not what I meant.
Okay.
So I can work on some of those words.
Okay. I did like the idea of, I think the idea of potentially using the finding a way to do a payment in lieu of.
Right.
I hadn't really thought about that before. I think that is, it's still 25% might be hard. There might be some pretty big payments for that, but
yeah, and there's all sorts of different formulas you can use to come up with that. One thing I will request of the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen is, since, folks have specific comments, sometimes it's hard for me to figure out, if so-and-so is saying this and someone else is saying this. I don't always have the ability to resolve that on my own in isolation. So if you could look at each other's comments and give me some feedback about what you do want to change and what you don't want to change, that would be more helpful than just giving me a bunch of individual comments.
I just noticed we didn't put the name tags out either, so you don't know who we are.
I heard him call you Gus,
Pete.
so. So that would be helpful for me, and I don't mean to delay your time frame, but I just don't want to make executive decisions that may not be what everybody wants to see.
That's the same
Jen,
speech I'm
I'll
going to use
send
for the
the
minutes.
comments. I'll send the comments around from Gus to all the planning board and Affordable Housing Trust members tonight.
And then I think, Mike, you've got questions, I'm sure, but then I guess the only question is whether we want the report to go in its draft form early or not.
I don't think, I haven't looked at all of your comments, Gus. I doubt we're going to have any comments that are going to affect the requirements that the state has for a housing production plan. Because I think a lot of the particular strategies you've identified, we don't have to have all of them in there. It's not as though you have to have 9 strategies or 6 or 4.
Correct.
I think as we go through, if there's some specifics that change in this plan, I don't think it affects it. So I have no issue with the draft going in to make sure if there's something glaring. I doubt it. I mean, you do this a lot, so I think I'm pretty confident that this has everything that it needs. But I'm fine with that, and I think we can go through this and see, because just looking quickly at Gus's comments, I mean, a lot of these are not going to affect the overall goals of the plan. and the
Most of them are
overall-
yellow. The greens and reds are the majority.
Yeah, the overall approach. I think if you look at how we implemented the last plan, if you looked at everything that's in there, you know, we didn't do everything that's in there. And we kind of took advantage of the opportunities that came to us, that came up over time and adjusted in light of circumstances, in light of those opportunities. I think we do the same thing.
But my question that I started with was really far less around the administrative submission of a plan to the state and far more around the strategic question of where are we trying to get to here?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question to have. And I think the reality the reality we're in as a town, as every municipality in, is that we are hemmed in by what the state and the Commonwealth allows us to do. And so I think to your point about affordability, Gus, I mean, the fundamental reality of funding municipal services is that we are limited to funding it with personal property taxes and 0.25% of a meals tax. And that's the flexibility that the state gives us, which are, you know, the property tax is a regressive tax generally, and we are not allowed any other flexibility to adjust our revenue raising to address the issue of people who have houses that have become exceptionally valuable over time, largely because of how restrictive the zoning is, and other factors particular to the community. But generally speaking, all of our property values go up because generally in the Commonwealth, we don't build housing to meet the demand, and so our values of property go up. But then you have people whose houses have gone up in value and for whom it constitutes a very substantial asset of theirs that they intend to cash in on at some point or pass on to their heirs. But at the same time, you know, if their income is not kept up with the property value, it creates an issue in being able to afford the property tax, but the Commonwealth doesn't allow us to raise revenue any other way. So I think in some sense we are chasing our tail, as it's not unique to this town. It's any town that relies heavily on individual personal property taxes, and we do for 94% of our revenue. If you look at Hopkinton, which has grown much more so than Medfield over the last 10 years, they still have 3 times as much commercial and industrial property as we do, and it maps almost directly onto the tax rates. If you look at the difference in the tax rate in the town, it's almost the percentage difference is almost exactly the amount of commercial and industrial, because to Pete's point, generally speaking, those types of uses use very few municipal services. You know, they generate other ancillary revenue. So on these housing issues as well, we are hemmed in by what the Commonwealth will allow us to do. We're hemmed in to a certain extent by choices that have been made over the last 50 years, 75 years regionally as well. So we're trying to maneuver between, and that's, you know, I see a lot of what the Commonwealth does in the housing area is trying to satisfy 2 constituencies. They're trying to satisfy a desire to create more affordable housing while still keeping everybody's property values propped up. Right, because, I mean, the easiest way to lower the price of anything is to create more of it, and we don't, right? We don't, and it's true in most places where housing is really expensive, it's because it's very hard to create more of it. And I'm not saying that's good or that's bad, it's just the reality, just the economic reality of where we are. And so I do think, Gus, to your point as well, that one of the things we'll be able to do, you know, assuming we're able to achieve this 10% and perhaps achieve it comfortably, is we won't necessarily have to just play the game that the Commonwealth wants us to play and look at SHI and look at capital A, capital H affordable housing. We can look at whether it's accessory dwelling units or other things that can, because right now the one option we have to make the town more affordable, that's really more affordable, is to have more or less expensive housing, right? To have more of the, and unfortunately, you don't have to look very far to see that a lot of the more affordable houses we have, when they get sold, they get torn down and replaced by a much more expensive house, right? Because that's you're paying $300,000 for a property lot, well, you're gonna do a lot better if you put $1 million house on it than you put a $400,000 house on it. So that's one of the things that, you know, we are hemmed in by, and it's a reality. But I think that's, and people can decide whether they think it's something we should do or not, but we will have that flexibility if we achieve the 10%, that we won't be tied to those SHI numbers and won't be tied to that particular approach to it, and we can take a different kind of look at it and see what we can do. So. I may have some specific comments as well, but generally, conceptually, I think this is heading in the right direction. I think some of the specific things I'll probably suggest removing or rewording a few of them, but I think we're generally in the right direction for getting this reapproved. And from my point of view, I think for me personally, I don't think I need to agree with every single suggestion in it for me to vote to approve the plan, recognizing that it's a menu and not a prescription. So the standard I'm going to apply is not do I agree with everything in it, but do I agree overall with the thrust? Because there's a lot more a lot of these things are things that require a lot more work beyond this anyway to do. So, any other comments from anyone? Bill? I don't see any Zoom land comments. So, Seth, do you want to adjourn your planning board meeting? And of course, you're all welcome to stay, but to the extent you'd like to adjourn your planning board portion of this meeting and find something else to do, feel free.
I don't know, it's a lot of fun.
That's fine. I'm happy to adjourn. I don't know if we need a formal vote, but
I think
if
you
not,
probably do need a motion to adjourn. Yeah.
how about it, guys?
They want to stay for the fun.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Paul.
Great. Teresa,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and Seth is yes as well. I'll sign off for Blake as well.
Well, thank you very
Thanks
much.
for everything. This was helpful.
Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Quick departure. There they go.
He was thinking about Stan.
They're not even moving to the attendees. They're just out. They're just gone. All right, next item is the special town meeting. Christine?
So we discussed at the last meeting setting the date for Sunday, November 7th. However, we did not discuss a time for the meeting. And while you haven't officially called the meeting with warrant, I would like to start advertising and discussing what a time for that would be.
Okay.
I got one question this week from someone asking whether the meeting was inside or outside, and I said it, I think our tentative discussion was to schedule it for the Sunday afternoon outside, but then as I recall, last week's discussion, we sort of had a non-concluding comment about what if it's a rain date on Monday night, and then remote rooms or something like that inside.
So that's part of the reason why you won't call it until the 14 days before to give us that flexibility. Right now, we're planning on inside.
Okay,
But if anything happens between now and, I don't have the date off the top of my head, that 14 days before, then we
okay.
would have the ability to pivot and go outside.
Okay.
But right now, we are planning on inside.
But I think even if it is inside, we will probably be able to create some accommodations for people who want to
Yes.
be distanced and all that. And,
Absolutely.
And different rooms.
Scott and I are working on those logistics Friday morning, actually.
great.
So I think 2 o'clock might be the right time myself.
Anyone else have any?
So I think, I think two, in the absence of the Patriots game, I would probably agree with you that 2 is the right time.
I think it's important to plan around that,
So
yes.
I would suggest that probably noon. Obviously, it's going to go into the game, but noon might be better. But then this is a question of setting the time, because you could also do it at 5. If we know we're going to be inside, conceivably
Right.
we could do it later in the afternoon too. I think earlier is probably better, but I think having the flexibility to post the warrant within the 14 days lets you do it. That's the only concern I have with 2, is that
I've actually learned that you can record the Patriots games and watch them in about a third the time.
I've learned that too. I've learned that too, but
I would think that if we held it, at noon, and if we were forced to have it outside, then we would be hoping for slightly warmer weather at noon if we went later into the
right.
evening.
No, I think if it's outside, it's
Yeah.
definitely got to be noon, so you can get the longer stretch. Because by that time, it's November 7th. It's heading in. It's right after you fall backwards as well in the time.
The night before, yes, yeah.
So, all right. Anything else on this?
That was the only thing I had.
All right. Next one. Action items.
So
Vote.
did we pick a time?
I don't think we've picked a time.
No, I think when people ask, we can say it's going to be in the early afternoon. We're looking at 12 or 2.
Okay, I thought you wanted a
We'll announce it.
specific time.
I understand the flexibility as we get closer, so.
Okay.
And the rain date is still Monday night, yes.
Right now, we haven't set a rain date because we're planning on inside. Yeah,
That's true.
yep, I know.
Unless we have leaky roofs in the schools.
That would be bad. There was a leak in the gym, actually.
I know, it's bad taste, bad taste.
All right, next one, vote to authorize me to sign the local approvals and certification for the Dale Street School Building Committee.
Correct, and this is outlining the meetings that have taken place.
In place since the last one of these certifications
Yes.
that we did. Any questions, comments, concerns? Do we have a motion?
Okay, move to authorize the chair to sign the local approvals and certification for the Dale Street School Building Committee.
Second,
All in favor?
yes.
Aye. Opposed? All right, next, vote to place a question on the special town election ballot and notify Marion Benaldi, the town clerk, of the following question for the ballot as written in the agenda. Do we need to read this?
I would read it, please, yes.
Okay, do you want to read it, Gus?
Yes, so this is a move that we place.
This language is the language required by bylaw.
Right.
so
I
yeah.
move that we place the following question on the special town election ballot and notify Marion Benaldi, town clerk. Question to read, shall the town of Medfield be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2 1/2, so-called, the amounts required to pay for the bonds issued in order to pay costs of constructing a new elementary school located on the campus of the Wheelock School at 17 Elm Street in Medfield, Massachusetts, to replace the Dale Street School, including the payment of all costs related to designing the new school project, equipping and furnishing the school, site improvements, and all other costs incidental and related thereto.
Second,
All in favor?
yes.
Comment. Can I, at some point, I'd like to ask a question about what this really means.
What do you mean?
What,
This is the required language for a bond to Prop 2.5 vote.
So is there still going to be a town election on the school?
Yeah.
This is the ballot
language.
question
So
for the-
The formal process for the town elections, we have to tell the clerk what the question's gonna be.
All right.
And this is what the question's gonna be.
So the way I'm reading it, though, is it can almost be read to say that at the town meeting, passing this,
this is not passed at the town meeting, this is passed at this is the election.
okay,
This is the ballot.
Just the ballot question,
thank you.
yep,
Thank you.
separate article.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Christine, can if it's okay, because Christine explained some things to me last week, could I just talk about process?
Absolutely.
Something I never realized. So this is the ballot question that goes for the election that requires the majority approval to authorize the Prop 2.5 debt override that will be required to fund the school. That's separate from the town meeting where the taxpayers will vote on whether to appropriate money for that school. So, okay. And we'll leave it at that.
I thought it was a motion for town meeting.
No.
No.
We have to, under the rule, we have to give this question to the town clerk,
Yes, thank you.
however many days in advance.
35 days prior.
My error.
No worries. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
But
Any
I would like it
opposed?
noted for the minutes that Bill Massaro made an error and admitted to said error at 8:32.
I blame the former administration. But
You were part of that administration too, Bill, I don't know. The next item relates to the collective bargaining agreement with the Medfield Police League. We're gonna defer that. We are waiting for something back.
We are waiting
from-
for some comments back from them, so we'll hold that until the
That
28th.
explains why I didn't read anything on that.
You didn't read anything on it. And then I would actually like to actually hold the appointments for the Cemetery Commission in reviewing the number of people allowed on the Cemetery Commission and reviewing the policy we recently passed on appointing to the Cemetery Commission. I would like to formally invite Ms. O'Neill and Ms. Caruso in for an interview. Since you're only filling one vacancy on that position, you have two candidates, then you say in your policy that you'll have them in for an invitation. So I will make that formal invite this week.
So I have one question and one comment. First, actually, two comments. First comment, reading both of these, I was impressed, pleased, and happy with both. So my first question in my head was, is it truly only one position, and do we not have the ability to let both of these people on?
You can make one full voting member, and you can have an associate non-voting member But state statute sets that there are only 3 members of the cemetery.
Okay, so only because I actually thought highly of what they said, I would be inclined to at least have us consider that. The second is a comment or a request, and that's that I would actually like to hear, I learned this the hard way a little while back, that we make appointments to committees, but if we have a committee and that committee has a chair, I would at least like to hear the opinion
Absolutely.
of that committee chair about what they think before we just make an arbitrary decision, so.
We will invite
if we
them
could
to
do that.
attend that evening as
Okay,
well.
okay.
Who is the chair of this? Is it Frank or
I think
Tom?
it's Frank,
Frank.
and Frank is up for appointment as well, so you can do that in person when he's here.
Probably have to appoint him first before.
He might
Alright.
think there's a coup, so I will talk to him.
We'll defer that. Next one is vote to approve a contract with Spark Energy Conservation LLC for sustainability coordinator services. Nick, this is you, right?
We, still working on the contract. We will hopefully have it next week. If not the week after that.
So we're also deferring this one.
And
We're also deferring.
just so I know, that's the consultant that the Energy Committee has planned to hire for a while now. That's
Correct.
Correct, okay.
That is the one. And you had approved the RFP that went out. We got the responses, and we're just working through some
Got it.
contract language.
Okay, okay.
And unfortunately, Mark, I didn't realize, Mark had told me he was gonna be on vacation and didn't register for me when we wanted him to review the contract. So.
Did we get more than one submission?
We did not.
Yeah, okay.
All right, consent agenda. The first is and I have a question about this one, a block party request at Wood End Lane for Saturday, October 2nd, 2021, from 89 Wood End Lane to Countryway. Is there a time on this one?
Yes, they said, they told me
Yes.
3 p.m. to 5 p.m.-ish. Short one.
Short block party, wow. All right. And then Girl Scout Junior Troop 82076 requests use of the gazebo on Sunday, October 3rd, from 1 to 2:30 p.m. for the official moving up ceremony. And the Medfield Lions request a one-day beer wine permit for Wednesday, October 6th, 2021, rain date October 7th, at the First Parish UCC for the Lions dinner meeting.
So the only question I have on the second one, given that it's the gazebo, and I think the gazebo is under the control of the library, I assume there's no conflict about about the Girl Scouts using that gazebo from the library standpoint.
The
It's a Sunday.
gazebo actually does fall under the Board of Selectmen's jurisdiction.
okay.
However, I already discussed it with the library, and they are actually planning on attending, but they have no formal plans that day.
Okay.
And just to give a shout out to my favorite Girl Scout Junior Troop, these are the same young women that planted the trees for our Arbor Day Festival, so,
Oh,
yes.
Well done.
I just have to say,
Or
for like the last
memorialized.
6 months, it seems like all I've been learning about is the constrained power of the Board of Selectmen, the things we don't have authority in. So I'm delighted to know we control the
control the
gazebo.
Gazebo, that's true. That's true.
But that also means you pay for its upkeep.
It's all right. All right, so do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the time there for the short block party?
I move that we approve the 3 items on the consent agenda with the addition of the time for the Wood End Lane Block Party being inserted as 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on October 2nd,
Second.
2021.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
No
aye.
meeting minutes. Town administrator updates. Do we have any car washes this weekend coming up?
We do. We have,
had two last
we have girls' basketball. We'll be having a car wash on Sunday. There are no car washes Saturday because it is Medfield Day.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Next meeting dates next week, September 28th, 2021, meeting with the warrant committee. Get your green eye shades on for that one. And then October 5th and October 19th. Selectmen reports. Pete.
The Medfield Foundation Legacy Fund Community Board has been meeting a lot recently because the Medfield Foundation Legacy Fund is going to be making grants in the next couple of months. So look for the announcement about the grants, and if you need some money in town, get ready to apply.
Gus.
I don't think I have any report. I'm looking forward to next week's meeting with the warrant committee.
All right. Just a couple of things from me. Tomorrow night, there is a community conversation with the school building committee, and then Thursday, the warrant committee is having another one of its sessions. This is on the future uses of the Dale Street School location. If the school is approved on Elm Street, I'm going to be attending there with Christine. Well, I think we're talking about procedure
Procedure.
and process, what
You
that
and I are on
means. A lot
process.
about care, custody, and control, and stuff like that. And so there's a cast of thousands attending that in their latest due diligence effort from the warrant committee. And next week as well, we are going to talk, I believe, Christine, about the update to our financial policies as well. Is that?
You are. We'll be sending out a draft this week.
Okay, excellent. All right. If that's all there is, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Opposed? All right.
We will see you at Capitol for 8 a.m.